What's happening, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Orange Weekly, presented by Crouse Health. My name is Brent Axe from syracuse.com, and we like to get together on Thursdays here on several channels. We've got both the Syracuse Orange Basketball and Orange Lacrosse Facebook pages up and live. We're on Twitter. We're also on Syracuse Orange Sports on syracuse.com via YouTube. Subscribe there. And you get the notifications that we're here live so you can participate in the show. Your questions, your comments, your thoughts on all things Syracuse sports, welcome as we go through the show. We do this live on Thursdays right around noontime. If you want to join us live and participate in the conversation, if you do miss it, very easy to find on those social media channels that I mentioned. We also put up a post on syracuse.com so you can check it out on demand when you want. So a lot to get into. Today, Syracuse basketball, big win over NC State on Tuesday. The question is, can they keep up the momentum against Duke on Saturday? Mike Waters writing a very interesting piece about attendance at the JMA Wireless Dome today. Probably not a surprise to hear attendance is down, but some of the numbers in that story were a little eyebrow raising. We will get into that a little bit. And as mentioned, lacrosse, Maryland is the opponent for both Syracuse men's and women's lacrosse this weekend. Top 10 matchup for the Orange in terms of Maryland. Syracuse did get into the rankings this week at number 16. The women's team has a top 4 matchup. The number 2 Terps, the number 4 Orange at the JMA Wireless Dome on Friday afternoon. So a lot to get into. And as mentioned, you guys can participate in the conversation. Jimmy leads us off by saying, can't believe lacrosse is not on TV. I agree. It's on something called Big Ten Network Plus, which I'm not paying for that. I got enough subscriptions and enough things, and they expect me to just sign up for that and forget about it and charge me $8 a month or whatever it is. So that is kind of disappointing. It is available on syracuse.com, the Varsity app, the TuneIn app. You can stream it on WAER.com. So there are options to take in the game, but yeah, I was hoping that one would make its way onto a Big Ten network, ACC network, that type of thing, but only streaming at this point. Better than nothing, I guess, right? Greg says, can Syracuse make the tournament? Bringing the questions right out of the chute here. So let me answer that question. Of course they can. Will they make the NCAA tournament? I don't think so, is still my answer. Now, they have a few more big games upcoming here. Duke right now is a tournament team. I mean, believe it or not, they're kind of considered a bubble team at this point. You beat Duke, that's a quality win. You've got Pitt and Clemson coming up next week, both quality wins. Don't slip on a banana peel against Georgia Tech, who's terrible. And Wake Forest is hovering on the bubble right now. So if Syracuse can have, 4 or 5 wins down the stretch here, and they picked up that quality win they've been looking for, the quad 1 win they've been looking for all year, Tuesday night against NC State. You have to do that and have a very strong showing in the ACC tournament, which Syracuse historically does not do. Some would say you got to win the ACC tournament in some scenarios, right? So can they make it? Yes, technically. Will they make it? I'm still going to say no. I still think it's a big mountain to climb for this team. But look, Tuesday night they showed they can punch up. They can beat a good team. They finally closed out a good team. They've closed out some other close games through the season, but Notre Dame and some of those wins that they got, it accounts in the standings. It counts in the win department. But you got to close against good teams. And when Jesse Edwards is making 3-pointers, like, it's just your night. Right? It was kind of weird at the Dome Tuesday night, but look, the resurgence of this team and their ability to close on Tuesday and what they're going to need to continue to see is this strong play from Judah Mintz. The freshman of the year in the ACC is going to be Kyle Filipowski, who Syracuse will face on Saturday, and we'll get into that matchup coming up here in a bit. But man, Judah Mintz is right there in that conversation. He's flat out one of the best freshmen in the country. He's averaging just over 15 points per game. The last Syracuse freshman point guard to do that was Johnny Flynn in 2008. He's got a lot of Johnny Flynn in his game. Aggressive, attacks the basket, can get at it. Just somebody who is just a leader out there, learning the balance between scoring and distributing, right? He started slow in a lot of first halves in recent games, and I think that's because he's focusing more on being a distributor, getting his teammates involved. But when it's time to take over, it's time to take over. And I think it's a valid question that some of you have brought up about Judah Mintz for next year, right? Players are always thinking about the pros and what opportunities are going to present themselves there. He's not showing up in a lot of mock drafts right now, but the thing is NIL money, right? You got to give, not that he's not getting it now, but you have to make it the incentive to come back is equal to that of going to the pros. That's the thing right now. Because if you can bring Judah Mintz back, if you can convince a Joe Girard to come back, Jesse Edwards, it's a little tricky with NIL money with Jesse Edwards because he's an international player and technically NIL rules state you can't pay somebody in the United States NIL money. I think they're trying to change that one way or the other. I think they can work around that. Can you convince him to come back with all the other players that will be a year better next year, like Chris Bell? I don't think Benny Williams is going to stick around. That's just a prediction on my part. But if you can get him to stick around, and of course the other young players like Justin Taylor and Quadir Copeland, and those guys that will all be back next year, you would hope. You're naturally going to lose a couple in the transfer portal at this point. But I don't think about next year. Next year is going to be determined by how strong this team finishes this year. And I don't think that's going to be an NCAA tournament berth, but whatever it is, even if it is the NIT, even if they just show that this team grew, they came together, something just, like they lit a fuse, it would seem here. They won 3 in a row. And if they can grab another win or two here down the stretch against name brand teams here, against quad one teams, and just at least be in the conversation for the tournament, that's an accomplishment for this team, right? A couple more from you guys here. As Lynn notes, unfortunately, Syracuse is not consistent. If they could come back with the team that plays the whole game, finally started hitting free throws. That was a big problem. Had we had that before, they would have closed out some of those games. Yeah, in the last 3 games, Syracuse is 51 and 58 from the free throw line. It's actually become a little bit more of a strategy to get to the free throw line. Judah's driving in the paint. Even Girard's driving in the paint some more. Jesse Edwards has been much better at the free throw line this year. I think he jumped from 56 to 74%. Syracuse was 16 of 17 at the line the other night. And when you have so many teams that are taking threes against Syracuse, which they always do against the zone, but look at NC State the other night. Kevin Keats wasn't happy about this, but they only got to the free throw line, 6 times, I believe, in that game. So if you're going to get to the line as much as Syracuse has, you got to cash them in, and they absolutely have been doing that. That also overcomes the fact that they haven't been making as many threes as they need to. Now, that stat's a little skewed by Chris Bell, because Bell has been, I think Donna DeTota noted this on syracuse.com, I think he's been 2 of 17 in three-point land. I want to say the last 3 or 4 games. He's a better shooter than that. He's a good natural shooter. He's just been off in that case. But what Syracuse has done to make up for that in this 3-game winning streak is at the free throw line. Because as we know, hashtag free throws matter, right? So good question there. Rick's comment, I want to go back to that. I worry about rebounding Saturday. Much improved in that area, but it's going to be real against Duke. Watch for Joe to bring the ball up more as Coach B adjusts best ball movement. Duke will pinch Judah as much as they can. Some good thoughts there. Maybe a little bit more. Symir Torrance has got some experience. Duke has beaten Syracuse 7 straight times. They're, I think, 5 and 16 Syracuse's record against Duke is. They gave them the old college punch in the nose in the ACC tournament last year. The other 2 games were dominated by Duke. This is not one of those Duke teams, though. This is a beatable Duke team. I mean, that matchup, the rebounding you noted there, Rick, the Jesse Edwards, Kyle Filipowski matchup is going to be fascinating to watch. Jesse struggled against DJ Burns, eventually got going, got 18 and 16, his 11th double-double of the season against NC State. Filipowski's not as much as a physical presence there, but he's big, he's tall, right? And he can certainly play with the best of them. He's one of the best freshmen in the country. Syracuse really heavily recruited him. Filipowski's at 15 points per game, 9 rebounds per game. Remember, he got fouled in that Virginia game over the weekend. Duke beat Notre Dame the other night and barely beat Notre Dame the other night. And like Syracuse, Duke is a young team. Filipowski's a freshman. Tyrese Proctor in the backcourt is a freshman. Mark Mitchell, who's shooting, what is it now? Mitchell's at 38% from three-point range. You got to keep an eye on him there. Derek Whitehead is at 40% from three-point range. 4 of those 5 guys, and the 5th guy in that conversation is Jeremy Roach, a player you recognize who's back with Duke. He's a junior, averaging 12 points per game right now. But like Syracuse, it's a really young Duke team, and Duke's typically young because they get a lot of one and done type players, right? But those veterans that can stick around and anchor things are huge. So I think this is going to be a real interesting matchup here. I think it's the most beatable Duke team that Syracuse had come across its path in recent years. The attendance at this game is going to be really interesting because I was checking now Ticketmaster, when you go in there, and I've posted the pictures on my Twitter feed. When you go into Ticketmaster, what you see are blue dots, and blue dots are those are available seats. And then there's pink dots, which indicate resale, certified resale, similar like a StubHub or something like that. I haven't even checked any of the secondary sites at this point, like SeatGeek or StubHub or any of those things. 2 days away from this game, though, there's a hell of a lot of blue seats. And it's not because they're blue seats for Duke fans. Those are available tickets for this game. So this game is not quite the event that it has been in recent years. Obviously, Coach K is no longer there. Duke's not ranked. Duke doesn't really have a crossover star. And what I mean by that is like my mother. Okay. My mom is a very general sports fan, right? She doesn't follow sports. I mean, she talks to me about sports and I talk to her about sports, but she's, when we talk about sports, she's like asking me what's happening, right? So when someone passes what I like to call the mom test, then I know they're a crossover star. My mom knew who Zion Williamson was, right? My mom knows who Paolo Banchero is, right? They don't have that kind of player. Kyle Filipowski is a great player, but he's not a crossover star. So to hear that attendance is going to be down for this game is not a surprise. And as Mike Waters wrote today on syracuse.com, I just want to read you a portion of the story here. So Syracuse basketball attendance is at a 20-year low. And Duke and Wake Forest are the games that can help maybe boost it back up a little bit here. But through the first 15 home games, Syracuse is an average attendance at 17,977. That's tickets sold, by the way. That's not butts and seats. The last time Syracuse saw attendance figures that low was 2001-02. That year, an average attendance of just over 17,000 per game. That team went to the NIT. So, look, this is not surprising. Syracuse has always been a fair weather sports town. There's a good, passionate, hardcore base of fans that goes. 17,000 is a great number that a lot of people would say. Skylar notes it here. We're still top 5 in attendance. Yeah, but Skylar, they're usually 1 or 2 in attendance. They won the attendance mark for a number of years, right? So we're still top 5. That's not the standard, right? I understand why it's happening. Don't get me wrong. Okay. It's a number of factors. The team hasn't been as good. Players coming and going in college basketball, economics, the home experience is much better for people. The motivation to go to games, parking, food, expense, the Wi-Fi is bad, which is a factor. People like to be on their phones or whatever the case may be. And the appeal to go just hasn't been there consistently. Maybe you go to a couple games a year as opposed to getting season tickets or whatever the case may be. So that's not a surprise to hear that, considering, a bunch of factors there. And by the way, like I noted, a lot of schools in the country would love to have an average of about 18,000 people per game, but it's below the standard at Syracuse. And by the way, revenue's off by 10% as well in this era where all the money counts for a myriad of reasons. So this is not going to be the boombastic 35,000 type crowd at the game as it has been. It's going to be a good crowd. Look, there was only 17,000 plus at the NC State game the other night. It was a great crowd. You don't need huge numbers to have a great crowd. You just need a crowd that's engaged, that's into the game. That Jesse Edwards 3-pointer, that's as loud as the Dome can get. And there's only 18,000 people there. So it's a yin and yang. I think it's interesting. I think the numbers are noteworthy. Syracuse starts winning again, people will come back. There's a certain, I call them the fair weather 10,000, right? There's a certain contingent of fans, much like my mother, that only go when it feels big time. It feels like an event. If Syracuse is good, they're ranked, they have a Carmelo Anthony type player, right? There's a certain contingent of fans that are only going to go in that case. They may follow the team, but maybe not as passionately as I'm there game in and game out as it used to be. World's a little different today. So we shall see how that goes. But looks like Syracuse is going to be off the mark a little bit here. We'll still be a top 3 or 4 team in the country, but they're usually 1 or 2, and that's really it. They kind of go back and forth with Kentucky's in there, Louisville's in there. It's usually some combination of Kentucky, Louisville, Syracuse that leads the country in attendance, but Syracuse not looking like it's going to happen here. Jimmy thinks that the attendance that Mike reported is overblown. Syracuse will still gross over 30 million. Led attendance the last 3 years. Wildhack even said it's down nationwide. I don't think it's overblown at all, because when you're off revenue-wise 10%, that's notable. Yeah, they're going to bank 30 million, but it could have been more than that. They'll get the TV money from the ACC and everything. They're still in pretty good shape considering what other schools are dealing with. But, Syracuse sets their budgets and they set a certain standard based on that revenue that's coming in. Attendance is down nationwide. There's no question about that. I think it's definitely worth noting. I don't think it's overblown at all. I think it's worth noting that that's the spot that Syracuse is in. If they continue to slide, it's going to be hard to get people to go back to those games. Interesting that Syracuse put out today, as a matter of fact, ticket packages for next season, for season tickets for both men's and women's basketball. Timing is everything in that department. A couple more comments from you guys here as I'm just scrolling through here. Appreciate your participation as always. Alan says they win out 2 more ACC games in the tourney. Were hard to keep out of the tournament. That's a big if right there. You're right if that's the scenario, because the tournament selection committee will have recency bias. You'll have some big wins, but that's a big ask for this team as much as they have been playing better as of late. Mary Ellen says Duke looks beatable. If the Orange play the way they can, they should win. I agree with that, Mary Ellen. Marcia notes, I think Cuse fans in Florida are more devoted and true blue than the ones who live in New York. We got a lot of you guys and gals watching from Florida, the post-game show and this show, and always great to hear from you one way or the other. Skylar notes, both lacrosse teams are ranked. We're going to get to that coming up here shortly. Comment here. Remember, going into every single basketball game, one team's going to win, one team's going to lose, and those kids are kid students, Syracuse Orange, and world-renowned. Look, I know they're kids, but they're also young adults, and they're in a big-time spotlight. It's funny how when they do well, they're young men, and when they don't do well, they're kids, right? It's big-time sports, and there's certain scrutiny that they should not get that professional athletes get, but in some cases, look, they're paid athletes. You are asked, speaking of attendance, to pay money to watch their games, right? So this whole their kids thing is true, and we need to be mindful of that. But there's still a certain amount of scrutiny that comes with being a high-level Division I athlete, and they're big boys and big girls, and they know that, and they can take that. So just thought I'd counter with that. But point well taken. Antonio says, I hope they switch things up and play the 2-3 zone. Yeah, Duke's been playing some more zone as of late. We'll see if John Shire takes a page out of Boeheim's book, as Krzyzewski did in recent years. Let's see. Scrolling through your comments here, friends. There's my guy, Brian, says, given the trajectory of this team, a run to the NIT Final Four would be something to be proud of. NIT tickets are cheap. Reality is the Orange are still on the NIT bubble. Brian, this is where you and I are going to disagree, right? In some context, you could be proud of that. It would be an accomplishment for this team to turn things around, but they could win the NIT. And I mean, let me ask you this. If Syracuse wins the NIT, you buying a t-shirt for that? You buying a hat for that? Are you celebrating that? Like, that's not the standard. The standard is the tournament. And if you don't make the tournament, your season failed. I think that's fair to say. So I don't know if I'd be proud of that. I mean, it gets semantics. It depends on how you term it. I think it would be an accomplishment for this team to do that, considering how young they were and everything. But that's just not the standard here. No matter how young they are, no matter how experienced they are, whatever the case may be. I get what you're saying, but look, that's not just my standard, by the way. That's Jim Boeheim's standard, right? You don't make the tournament, that's a failed season. That's a quote. That Jim has said that, right? So I get what you're saying there, but I don't think we can get comfortable with that as the standard for Syracuse basketball. But, here's the thing. By winning that NC State game, and if they can be competitive down the stretch here, at the very least, they're still in the conversation. It's February 16th, and no one's saying they're out of it. You can't say they're out of it. We got darn close to it, the way they were playing before they kind of turned things around as of late. But, they only lost by 4 to Miami. They only lost by 4 to North Carolina. They gave Virginia a battle, lost that game by 5, right? So they were showing that against the best of the best in the ACC, they could at least hang in that game. They just had to make 1 or 2 more plays to win it. They did it Tuesday. Let's see if they can keep that up at this point. Let's see here. NIL, no longer kids. They're paid athletes. That's correct. They're not professionals in a sense, but that has changed a little bit of the perspective there. Marcia notes there's been 5 games they could have and should have won, still hoping they make the tournament. And that's why it's important that you can't lose to the Bryants of the world. You can't lose to the Colgates of the world, because when you set yourself back and make it harder to pick up those quad 1 wins, this is 4 months out of the year. Now, the tournament selection committee, as we noted, does have recency bias. And if you can get it going now and play your best basketball now, that could be factored in. It really could. But that path is still tough, just based on the metrics and how people select teams for the tournament. Virginia Tech did it last year, though, guys. They won the ACC tournament, got that automatic bid, put another ACC team into the tournament, that wasn't expected, and kind of shook things up. And what am I trying to say? Oh, remember Jim Boeheim said before the season how much the Big Ten stunk in the tournament last year. The Big Ten came in with all the hype. The ACC was the one that came through and was successful in the tournament. It's going to be interesting to see how that goes this year, right? Because, you look at the top of the league at this point, and by the way, a lot of these teams are on Syracuse's schedule upcoming here. But Pitt's the top team in the league right now. Syracuse lost by them to 2 points, and they get them again coming up next week. So Pitt's 12-3, Virginia's 12-3. Syracuse only lost by them second time around by 5. Syracuse lost by 4 to Miami. They're 12-4. I think Syracuse is going to have a lot of trouble with Clemson, to be honest with you guys, but we'll see how that game goes. They're 11-4. Syracuse beat NC State. They've got an opportunity to beat Duke coming up Saturday. They're 9-6. Wake Forest is 9-6 in the league. Bubble team. That's the last home game coming up on March 4th. Syracuse lost to North Carolina, but the Tar Heels are right below them in the standings. And then there's a big drop off after that. The BCs of the world, Florida State, Virginia Tech, and teams like that. Georgia Tech is upcoming on the schedule as well, and they are terrible. They're 3-13 in the league and 10-16 overall at this point. So a lot of good opportunities left here. The schedule worked out the way it worked out in terms of opportunities for this team. So that's a lot on the basketball front there. You guys can keep chiming in about that here in the comments. But before we do wrap up for the day, I did want to mention a couple things happening on the lacrosse front. So Maryland is the opponent for both Syracuse lacrosse teams this weekend, and they're both big-time games. So let's actually start with the women's lacrosse team, who had a huge win over Northwestern last week to start the season. Kayla Trainer, the head coach, even says people thought I was crazy to schedule a Northwestern in that first game of the season. It was an instant classic, 16-15 win. Syracuse got Megan Carney back she missed a bunch of games last year due to injury. She had 4 goals. Megan Tyrell, the preseason player of the year, was great. She had 7 points in that game. Emma Ward was back. Emma Tyrell back. Sierra Cockrell back. They got Delaney Schweitzer in goal. Was terrific. 15 goals sounds like a lot, but she made a lot of key saves down the stretch. So that was a big-time win. No rest for the weary, though, because number 2 Maryland comes to the JMA Wireless Dome Friday afternoon game tomorrow. So if Syracuse can start 2-0 against 2 of the best teams in the country, it's early. There's a lot of lacrosse to be played, but what a message that sends about a healthy Syracuse team. And that's the key. I know that's the key for every team, but the women's team just lost so many key players from last year. They couldn't compete with the Carolinas of the world, the Boston Colleges, the Marylands of the world, the great teams, Northwestern, who we noted, who beat them pretty good in the tournament last year. So, look, it's as simple as this. If that team stays healthy, they're a national championship contender. But that game, what a first game at the Dome. Stu Gatz was there, for those of you that are fans of the Dan Le Batard show. You get the show. His daughter plays for Northwestern, so it's good to see Stu Gatz at the Dome and a good solid win. We'll see if they can keep that up against Maryland. On the men's side, they also get Maryland. And there's been some significant developments this week at Maryland. So Maryland was the defending national champion, number 1 team in the country. They lose to Loyola last week, 12-7. So they're going to be in a bad mood for this game. It was a West Jenny grad, by the way, who made 19 saves in net against Maryland last week. Logan McNaney, their goaltender, he is actually from Corning, New York, not too far from here in central New York. He's out for the year with an ACL. So they have a new goaltender coming in. Now, Maryland's still loaded. They have 5 Tuorthon Trophy preseason nominees. Brett McCarr is one of the best close defenders in the country. I'm curious to see who he's going to be on in this game. My guess would be it's going to be Joey Spallina, but he might work around a little bit. Maryland's got 2 great defenders. They can score. They didn't score a bunch against Loyola, that's for sure, but that's still a damn good team. So Syracuse is off to a 3-0 start. Spallina's got 11 goals. They just tattooed Holy Cross 22-5. They beat up Albany. Close game against Vermont. The competition level takes a big step up here. But Syracuse, I think, did all it could in those first 3 games. And Gary Gait did this by design, by the way. He loaded up 3 games early on that were manageable, that were beatable, to get Syracuse in the spirit of competition to play and step up against a team like Maryland and all the good teams that are coming down the pike in ACC play for Syracuse. But here's what I'll say about the men's team this year. The women's team already had this. The men's team just has more flair this year. Spallina, behind the back, switching hands, diving towards the crease. The speed, the stick skills are incredible. Finn Thompson is as talented a freshman as Syracuse has had in recent years. Spallina takes up a lot of that spotlight. Alex Simmons has been terrific on attack. You put Owen Hiltz out there, invert him. Now you got 4 talented scorers that are roaming around the crease, right? I think the defense has been better. I want to see how they do against a better team, but Will Mark has been spectacular in net. He's 4th in the country right now in save percentage, and I get who Syracuse played to start the year. You got to note that. Those aren't exactly barn-burning scoring teams that Syracuse faced. All 3 held under 10 goals, by the way. So Will Mark's going to have the same type of game that Loyola's goaltender had if Syracuse is going to have a chance at Maryland. Should be a good game, though. I mean, Syracuse only lost by 4 to Maryland last year. It was a little earlier in the schedule before Maryland really. I mean, Maryland went undefeated last year. They went 18-0, won the national championship. That loss to Maryland was their first in 2 years. They're still a juggernaut, right? If anything, maybe losing to Loyola was a bad thing because it woke them up and they're ticked off. But I want to see what happens in net. Now you got to put in your backup goaltender. He's a transfer from Binghamton, who was a good player at Binghamton. He was the America East Defensive Player of the Year a couple of years back. So they have depth at that position, and I think can step in and at least hold down the line, especially with McCarr and that talented defense that Maryland has. But we're going to really find out the progress that Syracuse has made. Much like the basketball team, this Syracuse men's lacrosse team is young. There's a lot of young players out there, a lot of new guys out there via the transfer portal, right? A lot of the familiar faces that were on this team last year are gone. Owen Hiltz is back, and Sam Kakemo's back on defense. Jackson Burtwistle's back at midi. But that list of familiar names is pretty short. It's like you can count them on one hand at this point. But it's been an exciting team so far, and I love to see the flair back, behind the back, right? Switching hands, high-paced, high-scoring, exciting play. That's what lacrosse should be. It's the fastest game on 2 feet for a reason. So I'm as curious as anybody to see how they do against Maryland, and I want to see what the women's team does against Maryland. It's another show-me game right off the bat after they beat a really good Northwestern team that got Izzy Skane back, who is one of the best players in the country, and they're as talented as anybody. I want to see how they do defensively and in goal. Schweitzer was great in game 1. Let's see if she can keep up that consistently. Linda notes here, Syracuse hasn't played a team that's pressed them on defense. It'll be interesting against Maryland, but I still think they can win this game. That's a great point. Maryland's defense is a lot better. They do press. They do challenge you a little bit. They're going to challenge, that's where turnovers come in, ground balls come in, possessions are huge, right? I didn't even mention that Maryland's got one of the best face-off guys in the country at this point. So they're good. Maryland, top to bottom, is just loaded. So cannot wait to see how this game goes and how all these games go. Lacrosse, basketball. Let's not forget our a little shout out for the Syracuse women's basketball team. who, look, they're on the bubble. It's going to be a challenge to make the tournament, but they are in the conversation here. So the women's team beat North Carolina a week ago today at the Dome, went to Notre Dame, top 10 team on Sunday, gave the Irish everything they could handle. The Notre Dame just pulled away in the fourth quarter of that game. And now Felicia Leggett, Jack and company go to Florida State tonight. That's a top 25 team. That's a huge quality win opportunity for Syracuse if they can win that game. Daisha Fair has been one of the most dynamic scorers in the country. Dariana Lewis and Georgia Woolley have been right up there too. Those are kind of the three musketeers, if you will, for Syracuse women's basketball. Woolley's been terrific from the outside. I think she scored 17 or more points in 5 of her last 6 games, if I'm not mistaken. Fair is always scoring right around 24, 25 points. She's one of the best players in the country. Frankly, I don't think she's going to be back next year because she could be a pro. She could be a first-round pick in the WNBA. So while the Syracuse men's basketball team hasn't quite made it on the bubble, the women's team is there. And if they get this win tonight, it's going to be a really interesting conversation down the stretch. By the way, that women's game is on the ACC network tonight at 6 o'clock, so you can check that out. There you have it, friends. I think we'll wrap it up there for the day. Another episode of Orange Weekly. Great comments and questions from you guys and gals. Really appreciate it, as always. So we're going to get back together on Saturday night after Syracuse plays Duke for Syracuse basketball postgame, presented by Crouse Health on a couple of these same channels that you're watching, Syracuse Orange Basketball Facebook page, YouTube, and Twitter. If you missed that, like you missed this show, easy to catch up on our social media channels, automatically embeds there. We put up a post on syracuse.com as well. Same thing with this show. We love to have you here Thursdays to get your questions and comments answered, but you can watch Orange Weekly anytime, Syracuse Orange Sports on YouTube, and we do put up a post on syracuse.com that's easily accessible to go back and watch the show on demand when you want. Thank you, Alan. Skylar saying go Cuse. Marcia hopes we're talking about another win on Saturday night. And there you go, Skylar. Got that orange emoji as the Orange take on Duke. Maybe not as big of an event as it has been in recent years, but hey, it's still Duke, and it feels good to beat Duke every single time. So we'll see if the Orange could pull that off on Saturday. Thanks for watching Orange Weekly, presented by Crouse Health. My name is Brent Axe. We'll talk to you again Saturday night after the Orange take on the Dukies. Enjoy the rest of your week, everybody.